Ray, Minicon.
Warajang ala wandunya. Creator God, we come before you and invite you by your Spirit to be amongst us again today. We ask you, Spirit of God, to enjoy our fellowship today, to enjoy being with us, to enjoy the praises that we sing, the words that we speak. We ask you, Spirit of God, to teach us to respond to our Creator's love. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, Ray. Bon matin, mesdames et messieurs. Wele is pikatuk. Tajinim epitim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you slept well. No response. That means you're all now sleeping. I hope you enjoyed, those of you who were with us last night, I hope you enjoyed the evening and the opening, both with the celebration of our graduates, those who were here with us and those who could not be. The clear commitment of our partners and our faculty to be a part of this learning community, the clear commitment that you demonstrate by being here with us. Also, very powerful opening address by our brother Ray. We were just having a conversation over here and saying, Ray grew up in the Christian Missionary Alliance in his theological training and has all of a sudden become very sacramental. And it was an interesting journey to watch, but to now bring into his conversation, his internal theological conversation, and also the conversation with others, some new things that he himself is being exposed to is really a blessing and a treat to us. So it was good. I do want to make public confession. I know the confessionals are at the back here for those of you who need to use them. Pastor Ray, who is the Australian Indigenous pastor for the Globe, and our elder Adrian Jacobs, I'm sure would be prepared to hear that confession, particularly if it involves some significant symbol of your penitence and repentance and desire to change, and perhaps some reflection on your willingness to turn the material table around. So if you're interested in doing that at any time, please let them know and they'll join you in the confessional. This is an edifice that was originally constructed as the mother house for the Sisters of St. Joseph many years ago. And Tyndale was fortunate to be able to purchase this from them as they declined in their enrollment in the mother house, and as their small hospital facility that they used to run from here was no longer able to be utilized. And so as Tyndale took possession of it, there were several things that they were asked to do, and one of them was to care well for this chapel that we're in. And I'm sure most of you are not aware that the stained glass in this chapel, done by Paul Barrier from Paris. There are only 2 chapels with stained glass of Barrier's in North America, this one and the one in Notre Dame. And it's is an absolutely stunning work. If you get a chance to look around, and you can go up into the balcony in the back there and see the signature plate that he installs in his work on my left side at the back. When this was being assessed architecturally for the upgrades that it needed to bring it up to current code standards, the architects who came in here to examine this facility indicated to Gary Nelson and the staff here that if this were to be built today, the chapel alone, just this chapel, with the workmanship that it has, would be a $27 million investment, which is a pretty significant attestation to not just the historicity of the change in cost for construction, but also the degree to which people took great care. This altar behind me, if you go and have a look at it, and please do, it's a single piece of Italian marble. And one wonders at the craftsmen and women who would be involved in constructing such a thing. So have a look around. Tyndale is a very open and welcoming place. So if you have moments between sessions and so on, have a look around. It's an historic structure, and carries a lot, even in the Stations of the Cross on the walls, carries a lot of values for us today. So now I did say I needed to make a confession, and then I digressed. My confession is this. As we concluded our ceremonies last evening and we were walking down to the small graduate reception down the hall, and there had been some signs put up that the cleaning staff in their efficiency had removed. So I know some of you ended up wandering this maze of buildings that Tyndale is, trying to find the place, and we do apologize. If you didn't find it, we'll refund you the 25 cents on your fees that might have cost you. No, I'm kidding, aren't I, Beth? I'm kidding. Okay. So as we're walking down, I was walking with Mark Brett, and Mark is here from the university, from Whitley College at the University of Divinity. And I believe, as I've mentioned to many of you, if not individually, at least in small groups, Mark Brett is if we were to sort of peg a significant person in the development of a partnership in Australia that is non-Indigenous, there's only one person that we could peg, and that would be Mark Brett, who responded to Ray Minicon after Ray and I had over 15 years tried to seek out partnerships in Australia for the Australian Indigenous community. Ray and Mark had a wonderful God-driven connection that led to Mark inviting us to Whitley College. And 3 years ago, in this past July, 2 years ago, this past July, 3 years ago, this July, we launched our first course delivery, and it's Mark Brett's work. And last night, as we were on this platform with our partners, in my own screw-up of royal proportions, I had neglected to ensure that Mark Brett was a part of the platform, since he is a significant part of our partnership. And Mark, I confess my stupidity and my inability to schedule well, and please forgive me. But Mark Brett, just so that people could see, maybe you just want to. So this is Mark Brett. I mean, we've since been introduced through Mark to other strong supporters and advocates, including Keith Dyer, for sure, Dorothy Morgan, and the incoming director for higher degrees by research at Whitley, whom we're just absolutely looking forward to working with. But the whole partnership thing is absolutely central to what we do in delivering the degree programs. As I said last night, as we gave diplomas to our students, at this juncture, they are acknowledgments of the work that they've done and the fact that they receive the legal piece of parchment from our partner schools. Now that only has about 20 more months to run, at which point in time, God willing, creek doesn't rise and ATS smiles kindly upon us as they have these last years, as we've begun to jump through all of their hoops, we will be a fully accredited institution in our own right. And the degrees going forward from that point will be NAIITS degrees partnered with our partner schools. And I'm so excited at that prospect. And I just want you to know that though you may not be aware of all of that, the fact that you come here and engage in the conversations and the community that we've sought over the years to establish here, that's what's made it possible. Last year when the ATS staff person, Barbara Much, was here, she went away from our Arcadia Symposium saying, I don't know as I've ever been in anything like it. I don't know as I've ever felt as welcomed. I don't know as I've ever felt that there was such a deep engagement with the conversations at a whole range of levels, both practical and theoretical, theological and missiological, all in the same space, and felt like there was something significant happening. So you make that possible. Without this community coming together each year, I'm not sure ATS would smile kindly on us, and I say that in all sincerity. So we're going to launch in a few minutes into this day with our first presenter, and then into conversation circles. And throughout the day, there'll be opportunities. We've tried to listen to you over the years and give some more space for informal conversations where you gather over cups of coffee or tea or go out on the lawn, because this is a beautiful sunny day again. Go out under the trees, wander the grounds, as I think Gary Nelson invited you to do last evening in his address. There's a beautiful, beautiful park-like expanse behind this building. It's on 56 acres of land. There's a small river that runs behind, and in the fall you can see the salmon jumping up the man-made falls to try and get to their spawning grounds. It's a lovely spot, so please take advantage of that. And as I say, take advantage of walking through the facility to see some of the historic architecture that the building contains. Tonight, and just so that we make you aware of that, tonight here, we are going to recognize and pay tribute to the work of my dear sister, Wendy Peterson, who took her journey September 28th last year, quite unexpectedly, while she was with her close women friends, including Cheryl Bear and Debbie Cron and Catherine Twiss and others in Paris, vacationing and celebrating birthdays together. And we want to commemorate the work that Wendy has done over the years as the founding matriarch. And I say that with the deepest respect for my sister, the founding matriarch of NAIITS. While Cheryl was the only other woman, back in those days we weren't quite as well educated. We've since become better at that. Cheryl's the only other founding woman. Wendy was really the matriarch, and we want to celebrate that tonight. Her work and her person, her family will be with us. Her husband Ed and her children will be with us. Michael Jacobs is going to be sharing in a concert tonight. Wendy had mentioned last year at the end of the symposium after we'd concluded. Last year we had Jonathan Miracle with us for a concert, and this year we should have Michael Jacobs, she said. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. And so we invited Michael right away, and he's with us tonight for a concert. Wendy really enjoyed Michael's music. So we want you to come out and enjoy that as we look through her work. Those of you who were here last year will remember that she was hooded with her PhD here, well, not here in this building, but at our symposium in Acadia. She was hooded with her PhD, and the graduation from our partner school, Asbury, would not have taken place until this May for her. So we had the privilege together as a community of acknowledging that work, and we want to continue that tonight. So be prepared for that. Beth has some announcements for us before we go into our first presenter.
So, have you noticed that our goal here is to stay 30 seconds ahead of you and what is happening? So we ran about 30 seconds behind in the information sheet. which when you go out from here, you will find on the table, and it has the internet access information on it that some people have been looking for. And also some other things that you might want to take a quick look at that. Just wanted to mention about the talking circles. We are about 45 seconds ahead of you on that. You will be going to your talking circles in a short period of time, and by the time that happens, there will almost certainly be some lists on the wall back there that will have the group names. Don't laugh at me, Diane. There will be the group leader names and your names. And so most groups will probably want to go outside today, so I'm not going to assign the rooms. What we'll do is we'll get the leader to hold up their name on a piece of paper, and you can look for that leader, and you can follow, the group can go where they would like. And the leaders, if you'd like to have a room, let us know, and we'll assign you a room, because we do have some, okay? And I'm almost sure that's going to happen. The other thing that's on your info sheet are the names of some of the places that we've been able to find some really great handmade Indigenous gifts, other items that you may see throughout the symposium, and we just wanted you to know where they came from so that you also might be able to connect with those different people that make beautiful things and beautiful foods. So those are also on there. We will always have someone at the registration table for you if you have questions, or if we're not 30 seconds ahead of you as we ought to be, just come and let us know, and we will do our best to take care of that. Thank you. Oh, and tonight after the concert, there will be refreshments in the Alumni Hall for all those who can find it.
Thank you, Beth. The Alumni Hall, I'll give you directions right now. Out the door to the left, down the hall to the left, down the hall to the right, down the hall to the left, down the hall to the left, down the stairs to the left, down the stairs to the right, down the ramp to the left, through the doorway and into the Alumni Hall. So now you know how to get there. I'm sure many of you have been to a whole range of different kinds of conferences over the years and have some sense of what it takes to put something like this together. Particularly when people are coming from across the globe. I've had people say, well, we do a citywide conference and it takes X number of hours and this amount of effort and so on and so forth. I was at a conference in Halifax not long ago where I was informed that the conference was a $120,000 conference to put on, and I thought to myself, well, that runs 10 years of our budget. I assure you it doesn't cost us that much, but it takes a lot of work. I mean, the logistics is amazing, and particularly when life changes, right? As my favorite philosopher once said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And as we've already discovered, a number of our close community members are unable to be here because life intervened in unexpected ways. Loss of loved ones, travel plans gone awry, and so forth. And so when those things happen, logistics can quickly go out the window. And if one is inflexible, if one doesn't have the capacity to shift, it makes it awfully difficult for those who come from a distance, as some of you have done, to be a part of something like this. And the last few years, Beth Wood, whom you just heard from, has been our singularly stellar logistician. All of the logistics have been dealt with by Beth. And I know that some of you will say, well, I felt some bumps in the road, and I'm sure that you did. But I assure you, had you not had Beth at the helm, those would not have been bumps. They'd have been significant Winnipeg spring potholes. And it would have been much more difficult. So Beth has done all of the logistics here, including thinking through what it would take to the best of our ability in the facilities that we often don't know to make you comfortable as best we can. And I hope you feel her effort and the warmth of her affection for you as she does that. And I wonder if we could she's just walked out the door, doggone her. She always does this to me, she hates this. But please take a moment somewhere along the line today to tell Beth thank you for all that you do. We wouldn't be here doing this without her. So thank you. Before I introduce our morning speaker, I just wanted to look at a text with you briefly. You know, as we're talking about land and place, I'm always drawn to two narratives. One is the Mi'kmaq creation narrative, which is itself a 7-day narrative. I'm quite convinced, as are most of our folk, that it's a narrative that significantly predated any Christian contact, so it isn't influenced in that way. That talks about the creation of the first human being, Kluskap, by our Creator. And depending on the nature of the telling of the story, that Creator is named Gesuk or Nixkam, or Chiniskamich, and carry the connotations of the giver of life and or the unmade maker. And there's this reflexive idea that because the maker is unmade, we are made. Because we know that we come from some place, not simply our mother's womb, but the land on which our mother and our father and our extended family have lived as we were nurtured in that womb, and as we then came forth from that womb, and as we set foot on the land. I love the Cree communities in the north, the custom of the walking out ceremony, where at 1 year of age the child walks out onto the land and into the community and becomes a functional member of the community. And there are ceremonial and cultural practices that are a part of that introduce the child, be they male or female, to the community and to the contribution that ultimately they will need to make to the community, so that the community has perpetuity, so that the culture continues. I just love to reflect on that. And so as we are emerging into the lands of our birth and so on, we emerge into this place where there are particular peoples and topographical features and a history. So as Kluskap, the first human being, is made, he lies in the sand of his construction, immobile, unable to move, only able to perceive that which is around him, to listen and to observe with his eyes, to hear with his ears, to smell in his nostrils, to use those senses, as Ray spoke to us last night, the tactile and other senses, to perceive what's happening around him. And he watches all of the rest of the creation in its formation. And as it begins to move around and to take on its roles, the birds flying above, he hears the slapping of the tails of fish in the water beside him. He hears the beat of feet and hooves on the land. And as these things are taking place, he's wondering at what's taking place around him and what does this all mean? And then a bolt of lightning comes down and strikes the sand where he lies, and he is animated. And it puts me in mind of Ezekiel 37, for those of you who may be familiar with that passage, the Valley of the Dry Bones. As Ezekiel, the prophet, is brought out into the valley, and he is invited by the Creator, by God, to make an observation and to reflect with an opinion. Can these bones live? And Ezekiel, being the common human being that he is, and being as evasive as we tend to be when we're confronted with the Creator of all things and the need to wrestle with the truth of life, he says, "Only you know. What do I know? I'm just a common human being." And then he's invited to participate in some very profound things. And prophesy to these bones, and they rattle around, they shake together, and they all of a sudden you can see these white bleached skeletons. This is the picture in my mind. And they're standing erect. And then prophesy again. Say some more. And flesh appears, and sinew covers the bones. And they have a human form. Prophesy again. And this is the part I really love. Ray talked about it last. Prophesy to the four winds, the winds from the four directions, and let them come and breathe life into these inanimate figures. I love it. And they come to life. And I can just feature them moving around, just like stumbling around and wondering what's going on here, as I place a little bit more literalism on the narrative. And then the next thing happens. They aren't fully human yet. They aren't fully formed yet, because the Creator of all things needs to pluck them up and place them back in the land. Place them back in the land. And give them connection to the land to help them learn their identity in the land. It's a wonderful narrative. And here in the Genesis narrative, as the first human being is created, paralleling that Mi'kmaq narrative, Yahweh, God, says, "It's not good that the human being is alone. I will make for the human being a helper as a counterpart. And out of the ground, Yahweh, God, formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the human being to see what that human being would call it. And whatever the human being called the living creature was its name. And the human being gave names to every domesticated animal and to the birds of heaven and to all the wild animals. But for the human being there was not found a helper as his," and I place the male pronoun there at the moment, "as his helper." I just find it intriguing that we have the capacity to participate in the naming of the things that we encounter. We have the capacity to name them for good purpose and in a good way, whether it be other human beings, whether it be features in the land, whether it be relationships, whatever it might be. We have the capacity to participate in the naming, and in so doing, giving functional relationship to that which we name. We do it in the topography of the land, we do it with one another. And yet so often we're prone to naming in very negative ways. We're familiar with those. And we give names that describe a trajectory that isn't the intent of our Creator, of Nixkam, of Kesu, Kichnikskamich, of God. We tend to name in not very positive ways. And so, over the years, we've been inviting people to think in asset-based theological frameworks instead of those deficit-based ones that we've often named in, and that have described not only the land, but the topography and the people of the land, whether it be indigenous or not. So as Ray was reflecting last night and taking this longer journey into the sacramental theology that he's begun to engage more rigorously, I was hearing some of that. And I was put in mind not only of our creation narrative as Mi'kmaq people, but of this text. And since Lenore Three Stars was unable to be with us because life intervened, I thought I might share that with you this morning so that we could be ready to receive our first speaker and engage the content and the context and the naming of it in positive ways, so that we might be people of this land as we gather as a community and pursue the intent of God for all of God's things, which is their ultimate and full fulfillment as his intent for that creation that he made. My apologies for the English male pronoun that she made, that Kichniskam, Geisel Nikskamich made for us. I'm going to invite Chair Russell to come, our board chair, to introduce our first presenter for this annual symposium.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Maybe I've been sitting too long, but I'm going to invite you actually to stand just for a moment. And we're talking about connection to land, but I know some of you are new to NAIITS. And so I'm going to invite you actually just to turn and greet one another. And if there's somebody new here, to express yourself. You are Allison. Okay, good. Sherry. Yes. So wonderful. Okay, good. You can just have a seat in the front row, and I'll.
The papers are uploaded to the website.
Okay.
And then there'll be a few paper copies
Okay.
back
Okay.
this morning in a few minutes.
Okay.
And then if people have to have a USB, they need to come and give their name and we'll make them.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Now I'm going to invite you to have a seat. I think that's the most chatter I've ever heard in a church context during those welcome parts. But for those of you that are interested in a paper form of the presentations, there will be some available, but you can also access them on the website. For those of you that might have computers or other electronic devices that you can upload the papers on the website, I encourage you to do that to save our trees. But for those that need a paper form, there will be some available. And if you want them all on a USB, please let Beth know, and she will make sure that she gets that to you. This morning, it's my privilege, and I want to explain just a little bit of how sometimes these presentations come about. So we send out a call for papers, and people send in a synopsis of what they'd like to speak about. And so if you're here for the first time and some of these conversations or topics intrigue you in the years to come, we encourage you as well to also submit. And so we have these submissions, and we've received quite a few this year. And so a little small committee of us got together and went through them all. And from that, there arose a variety of topics, and you'll get to hear some in the marketplace as well as some of our plenaries. And this morning, it's my privilege to welcome Allison Kemper. And Allison is on the faculty of Ryerson after a long career in not-for-profit management. She's an Anglican deacon and a settler, and she started an MBA when she says, "I realize that the decision-making with the greatest impacts on the environment and on society was being made in corporate boardrooms." After graduating as valedictorian of her class, she earned her PhD exploring business strategy and corporate social responsibility. Sounds like a very interesting person to come and speak to a group of theologians at time, isn't it? But theology crosses our everyday living and being. So I'm excited to have Allison come, and she's going to present on surrender, or the accounting changes that created Canada. Where's our accountants? The acquisition of Hudson's Bay Company and the alienation of Rupert's Land. So I invite you to welcome Allison as she comes.
Thank you so much. Put it in my pocket? Yeah, I've never been given tobacco before. Okay. This is embarrassing. I've never been given tobacco before.
It's already
I knew about that, but never happened to me. I feel so deeply honored to be here. I sent a note to Terry when the call for papers came out, and I said, "I'm a settler. Can I send a paper?" And I just started to get waves of welcome, and culminating in my gift of tobacco now. I'm an Anglican deacon. I learned theological language when I was a very young woman. I have a number of degrees in theology and church history. Ended up having to leave all that when I came out of the closet in the mid-'80s, and thought that I needed to keep working in issues around the survival of the planet and the ways in which business interacted with that. So I ended up doing a PhD in strategic management at University of Toronto and was lucky enough to land a job in the same town in which we live. I come from not just settler stock, but from the worst of settler stock, and I am on my own journey of decolonization. And I am right now feeling like I don't want my research on the topic I'm presenting today to go forward much farther or much faster without some Indigenous collaboration. And I don't know what that looks like. Ray Eldred last night was very funny when he talked about being the exotic raw data. But I'm here to listen to your response, to find out whether I'm saying things that folks have known in Indigenous communities for decades or, more than a century. And I'm really restarting my research with a new audience here today. Is that okay? All right. The other thing I have to say is I use slides. I didn't know the format here. Everybody's been so good about just talking. I don't know how to do that. So if you can't see the slides, come forward, right? There's some here and here, and there's the big one here, but if you can't see it, move forward. There we are. So, I think it's on now. There we are. I just wanted to say, because of what's happened this week, because of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry Report, and because white people are being just as horrible as white people can possibly be, I wanted to show this and say, yeah, me too. Dr. Garcia Muradov, I don't know this person, but they tweeted this yesterday. Violence against Indigenous women is genocide. Hydroelectric dams are genocide. Uranium mining is genocide. Privatization of lands, lakes, and rivers is genocide. Gentrification is genocide. Homelessness is genocide. Economic embargoes are genocide. The entire settler system is genocide. So that's a lot of work to do. I'll do a little piece of it, but that's where I want to start. And that's the other thing that's happening this week, and I'm aware of it. And thanks to the work of people like Jennifer Henry, who was here last night at Kairos, keeping the social media going, reminding settlers to call their senators. Let's hope the Conservatives get out of the way and let it go through. All right, so that's kind of today. To be with you at such an urgent part of our history together, I think is an enormous privilege. Okay, so here's what I have been thinking about for years now. That the way in which settlers changed the relationship between themselves and the land changed the relationship necessarily between Indigenous people and the land. That settlers began to price land, to transform their understanding of their relationship between themselves and the land through accounting. Who would have guessed? Anybody here an accountant? Did you know that accountants would do this? Would you come up and just hang out with me? All right. So, So I want to talk about the change that happened in this land because of the change to the Hudson's Bay Company. How many of you are from areas that drain into the Hudson's Bay? Right. Once known as Rupert's Land after Prince Rupert. That whole area, 1/8 of North America, is the subject of my talk today. So when we changed how the land was priced, when we gave land a price, we changed its relationship to the colonial powers back in Europe, to settlers here, to corporations, to wildlife, to First Nations, and to Métis. So this is Tim Mitchell, who writes in a collection of essays called Do Economists Make Markets? So when Terry talks about how naming things changes things, it's a perfect setup for my talk this morning, because this weird French philosophical notion of performativity is exactly what Terry was saying. As we rename things, as we describe them differently, we change their meaning and their almost their existence. So we all know about the Hudson's Bay Company, probably. I didn't, because I was raised in the US, as I said, the worst kind of settler. You don't want to know. And the Hudson's Bay Company, as you know, was given the right not to own Rupert's Land, but to trade with the people who lived in all the areas that drained into Hudson's Bay, right? It was not a deed. It was a right to carry on business there. And they carried on business without any reference to pounds sterling for a long, long time, for nearly 2 centuries. They worked with people in this land using a system of barter accounting. It worked perfectly well for a long time. And in 1866, everything changed about the Hudson's Bay Company as part of a whole kind of grab for their resources. And financial accounting was introduced. So there's Rupert's Land. It's a lot of space, eh? So the ships would go over, laden with various goods that people here wanted, and they would take stuff back that various folks in Europe wanted. And to make that possible, there were a lot of forts set up, or factories was the other word. And we still use those place names to this day. So we see Albany Fort, Moose Factory now. So all of those areas were really trading posts set up by Hudson Bay Company, as everyone here already knows. And here's what the cargo was. They took back beaver, marten, otter, cat, fox, wolverine, black bear, white bear, wolf, fisher. It looks like it says fither, but it's really fisher. All these furs from Albany, Moose River, East Main, York Factory, Severn River, and Cumberland House. So they were enormously valuable, and they did that for centuries, right? So there weren't any more, really. And the way they accounted for it, the accountant here knows this stuff probably better than any of us, is with a currency called made beaver. Made beaver. How many people already know about made beaver? Some of you. Okay, so made beaver is basically a dressed beaver pelt, and it was a kind of currency that you would use to determine what you could trade it for. So if you wanted 2.5 kilograms of sugar, sort of a 5-pound bag of sugar, you needed to have 1 beaver pelt. Or a pair of shoes was a beaver pelt. Or 20 fish hooks was a beaver pelt, right? So there's an exchange. Well, that's great if all it's for is getting stuff back and forth to what is now Canada. But the people in Britain, they were big financiers, and they wanted more control over the process and a lot more money out of it. At a time when the number of animals that could be caught and trapped and whose hides could be exported was declining because of the overhunting that the Hudson's Bay Company caused. So this is going to be hard to read, but I'll read it to you. The bookkeeping system basically was a cycle of exchanging here on this side of the Atlantic, and then they would send the inventory back to Britain, and they would get a budget made in Britain, not here, and then they would outfit next year's boats with whatever they thought would need to be exchanged. So it was a kind of closed cycle. So then this guy named Edward Watkins says, hey, wait a minute, look at all that land. That land's worth a lot more than a bunch of beaver pelts. And he also said, we don't want the Americans coming into British territory. So what we need to do is build a railroad. And he was also a guy who made a lot of money off of railroads in the UK, which, as you know, railroads don't make money. So he wanted to build a railroad across Canada to ensure that there was not yet a Canada, but to ensure that there was a differentiation east-west, so that the Americans would not come north. And he felt that he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone by building the railroad, making money off the railroad, and also by selling off Rupert's Land. So he was quite remarkable. So he organizes this crowd called the International Financial Committee, IFC, and he says, I'll sell you all this. It's kind of like, I can say this here, I can't say this in business conferences, kind of like the devil at Jesus' baptism. And he puts out this prospectus saying, you can have all of Rupert's Land if you buy shares in this new company, which is the old Hudson's Bay, transformed into a financial company rather than a barter company. So they say, okay, we'll buy in, but we need to know what it's all worth. So they get an auditor, right? And they replace the barter accounting with financial accounting. It no longer matters so much what a beaver is worth. And it allows the centralization of control and the centralization of ownership of the Hudson's Bay Company to happen all in Britain. And not much happens over here. There's much less control here. So before 1869, a few people owned Hudson's Bay. They used barter accounting. They traded with the word Aboriginal comes from another source. I should just swap that out and not tell anybody. But Indigenous hunters, they used made beaver. They maintained law and order. They had a sort of semi-governmental relationship here, but only in the area right around the forts or the factories. They didn't try to control the whole of Rupert's Land. Afterwards, they handed all of the governance to Canada. They began to use financial accounting for the corporate part. They decided that they were real estate developers, because that's what made the money look big on the balance sheet back in London. Lots of people owned them, none with a particular moral outlook. And they really only cared about the little strip of valuable land near where the railroad was going to go, near the US. And they mostly wanted to settle Europeans, because Europeans would pay a lot of money to move their stuff across the country on this new railroad. And they worked in pounds sterling or in dollars and not in made beaver. So how does this change in the accounting system mean that Indigenous people lose their land? Where did that go? There were 3 questions there. They disappeared. All right. So there's a really cool book for are there some geeks out there? Geeks like to read geeky books? This is a book about the East India Company by a guy named Philip Stern. He published it in 2011. And it's an interesting comparison to make with what we know about the Hudson Bay Company. But basically, in the 17th century, Britain wanted to be everywhere. All the colonial powers wanted to be everywhere. But the British said, well, we don't actually need to send soldiers. What we need to do is send traders to Rupert's Land. So they didn't send soldiers. They didn't try to take it over. And what they had was an economic relationship with the folks who were already living here. So they had a little bit of governmental function, and that was to defend their forts, to make alliances, and to challenge intruders. And that there would be a kind of home guard of Indigenous people, many of whom we now identify as the precursors of Métis nations. And that this relationship was a different kind of relationship of ruler and ruled. So my theory is that we had this old, weird 17th century notion of what a company was that kept going for 200 years until just before Confederation. And at that time, all these wild London financiers jumped into the market, grabbed up Hudson's Bay Company, and said, no, we want to disperse the assets so that we can turn it into money. So they kept what we'll call HBC LLC, the corporation, and they sold off Rupert's Land. But here's the trick. I looked at the documents. They never put it on the balance sheet. They never owned Rupert's Land. They sold what they never owned. And what's interesting is you've always known that, right? But it's in Western accounting records that they never owned it. The accountant here is going, yes, you get it, right? Like, which is why I need not to be alone in moving this forward. So after that, the land was marketized. It was turned into something that could be bought and sold, something where the resources were extractable, something completely different than it had been years earlier. Hudson's Bay became a multi-divisional company. It sold real estate. There was a Hudson's Bay Oil and Gas. You can still see records of that. It had a retail industry, and until just a couple of years ago, had a fur trade itself. And it could only exist because it had monetized its assets in this new kind of understanding of money and corporations that emerged in the mid-19th century in London. So what I'm saying is kind of like what Terry said. If you speak of the Hudson's Bay Company as these financialized assets, it becomes that. And what is it doing owning 1/8 of North America? Well, it makes no sense. It makes much more sense for the new country of Canada to own this giant territory. So it's in speaking these accounting words that we see a new understanding of what this land is. And these new owners, because they had the audit, could demand that the management sell off Rupert's Land. They had been promised that it was marketable, so they demanded that it be marketized. So by the 19th century, it had had a charter for a long time, right? 150 years. And then we started to see more and more competitors. Northwest Company, the Selkirk guys. And by the 1840s, as the beaver started to decline, as there were fewer things for Indigenous peoples to trade, as the economies here declined because of the depopulation of furry animals, the Hudson's Bay Company was very worried about the decline in health and vitality of the communities with which they traded, but they weren't doing anything about it. They weren't helping those communities to survive. And so the Hudson's Bay Company in the 1840s and 50s received a lot of criticism about its relationship with Indigenous peoples because it had exploited all the resources. So there was enormous moral pressure on Hudson Bay Company to just stop doing what they were doing. In addition to these new companies that had come in the last 50 years before. And the other big pressure was, of course, from the South, that the Americans wanted to take over the whole continent. So everybody was fighting over the ownership of Rupert's Land, and the government of Canada said, really it's ours, but we don't want to pay for it. They didn't want to settle the issue in court. They didn't want to go to war over it. And as you probably know, because you took British history and I didn't as a child, there were lots of different elections and new governments in Britain at the time, so it was total chaos. The emergence of Canada happened as Britain was just blowing up. So they could solve all of those issues by financializing the company. But you know who wasn't at the negotiations? Just take a guess. Who wasn't at the negotiations? Yeah, the people who actually were in eternal relationship with this land. So when you financialize something, you isolate it from its meaning, from its value, right? It becomes numbers on a page and doesn't have the textual and the depth of meaning that it had before it was financialized. It becomes a single number. Kind of like what Terry was talking about this morning. When you enumerate something, you change its meaning to be a very tiny piece of its overall meaning. Talked about that already. Here's my favorite. This is the prospectus I talked about earlier. So he sends this out saying, if you just give us 20 pounds, here's what you're going to get. The assets of the Hudson's Bay Company, recently and specifically valued by competent valuers at £1,093,569. He made that up. Hudson Bay Company never said prior to Watkin that they owned it and that it was worth money. The landed territory of the company held under the charter, which extends over an estimated area of more than 14,000 square miles, upwards of $96 million in value. Really? And nobody noticed before him? Come on. And then he says, much of it's fertile, and we can grow stuff so that settlers can come. And then he says, it's rich in mineral wealth, and we can take those minerals out. This is the document that's so important for our history as a number of peoples together. I think you can find this document. Are you ready for this? Maybe not on the Hudson's Bay Company website, but maybe you can, right? Like, nobody's embarrassed about it. All right. Pardon me? I heard. The company's territory, says Watkin, embraces an estimated area of more than 1,400,000 square miles. Embraces, isn't that a nicely ambiguous term? Like, does he really think they own it, or does he not think they own it, right? Embraces. He maybe doesn't want to get sued. Actually, interestingly enough, in Britain at this time, there are no laws about what you can say in a prospectus, right? Now, if you put this out, you would be in jail for a little while. But then it was perfectly legal. So these calculative devices, these financial records, change the world. They distinguish what's being calculated. They detach it from other objects. So now this land is worth $1 million or £1 million. Wait a minute, this is not just £1 million in a pile here. This is water and air and ecosystems and history and families and all those things. No. Once you've numbered it, it extracts just a single meaning. And it transforms all of this into a new object, which is a price. So we know that it got sold to the International Financial Society, then it got resold to all these people, and then all these people said, we need an external auditor, and then they blow up at the management in 1866 saying, you can't keep running it the way you used to. You have to sell Rupert's Land. So I better hurry up and finish up. So right after this, right, what happens? The BNA, the Rupert's Land Act of 1868, which allowed the government of Canada to take over the control of Rupert's Land from the company. And then the Deed of Surrender, 1869, which generates this paper called Surrender, and a really good book called No Surrender. I'm sure some people in this room were part of writing it, but surrender is a really important word. And then the Manitoba Act of 1870. Why don't I see it? All right. Doesn't matter, I don't. So the deed goes to the deed from Rupert's Land goes to the Colonial Office in May of 1870. Hudson's Bay Company gets paid off on the 11th of May. The Queen accepts the surrender on the 22nd of June. The transfer to Canada and the creation of the province of Manitoba are on the 15th of July. And shortly thereafter, BC becomes a province. Kavanagh's article in 2011 says, Rupert's land was never bequeathed to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, but was instead alienated, removed from them, and sold to Ottawa in 1870 in what must be surely ranked amongst the most ludicrous transactions in the history of Canadian property law. So the company signs the deed of surrender on November 19th, 1869. The Canadian government ratified the deal on December 1st. Just days later, London received word of the Northwest Rebellion. Jumping the gun, the Canadian government had sent an advance party of surveyors to the Red River to measure up its new territory without even notifying its Métis inhabitants. So, my time is over.
Your time is never quite over here, you know. We don't.
I'm 3 minutes late. And I'll take questions?
Yes.
Is that what Q&R is? Questions and responses?
Yes, it's called Q&R because we recognize that few of us have answers, but we do have responses.
So I'm going to get out my notebook because I'm here to learn. And if anybody wants to be part of this process with me, I think I have my business cards with me, I'm not sure, but anyhow, you know how to find me. And I'd love to be on this journey with people who want to learn this stuff too. So questions. This happened to Ray last night. It's not fair. Have you not had enough coffee? Come on. Yes, please.
Brooke. Hold on, we have a microphone. Chris is our runner.
I feel like I might have been your most attentive audience member.
I can't hear.
I was just saying that I think I might have been your most attentive audience member, and you might have been just speaking primarily to me, but thank you very much for your paper.
I just realized the reason I couldn't understand you was because you're Australian. And it's not the mic, it's my Canadian preconceptions. Okay, so I'm going to redial my listening skills.
Yeah. Maybe I should just talk in numbers and then maybe we can have a better conversation. I just want to thank you. That is significant work. And as a chartered accountant, you've blown my mind. And it resonates with me with work in Australia by Dr. Rosalind Kidd when she uncovered the stolen wages of how Aboriginal people's money had been held in trust by governments and never paid right up until the 1960s. And for you to challenge the whole capitalist regime of which the Western system is still built upon is very significant. So I thank you for doing this work. One question I had as an external auditor, I was an auditor for 9 years, who was the external audit company? Do you have that information?
We have that information. In fact, Watkin himself was a CA and did an audit early on. And then people said, no, not Watkin, because he's now part of the problem, and we'll get some new auditors. And then there was a problem for many years because the auditors ended up on the board. So the tradition of external auditing was just developing in Britain at this time. So that's another paper, and maybe I have a co-author here about that. There were real struggles, and we can see there's a newspaper called the Railway Journal that was published in London every week in the 1860s through 1890s, which was about these annual meetings of shareholders, or shareholders that would get together and grump about their horrible management and why they weren't developing the companies quickly enough and making enough money. And one of the big grumbles was the fact that the auditors were not arm's length enough.
My other question, or actually it's an advice, that to make sure that all of your documents are held in numerous copies in numerous places in case you're shut down. And that's what I said, maybe we should stop the live stream. But just thank you again. I also wondered, do you know what so in Australia, our oldest organisation, one of the oldest, is the Bible Society of Australia. And I wonder if you've tracked any of this work.
I have not looked at, I've run into people doing some similar work in Australia and New Zealand, particularly about the railway companies, because they didn't have exactly the same kind of setup as the Hudson's Bay Company.
Yeah, but I wondered in the North American context to track
but the
this
Bible
against,
Societies, okay, so here's
against
my
Christian
secret thing.
organizations.
It's not secret anymore in a minute. I'm an Anglican, sorry, just the way I roll. And I know that the enormous land holdings of the Anglican Diocese of Toronto, which the last Archbishop said were $1.6 billion worth of real estate, are not on the balance sheet.
It's the same in Australia.
Why are they not on the balance sheet? It's because they were deeded to the Anglican Church by the government of Upper Canada in the 1840s and were never evaluated. They were stolen and given to the Anglican Church. So one of my research projects, which may get me tossed, is to look at how many other organizations other than the Hudson's Bay Company were involved in alienating land from Indigenous people and putting it quickly to the side without any kind of valuation or compensation or whatever. There was no process, right? It was a political process. So I'm really interested in the fact that the Anglican Church owns all that land that never went on a balance sheet.
Hi, thank you very much for your words. I teach in the biological field, and so numbers and accounting are in another environment, I guess, for me. But it's not lost on me that the currency of dollars is what economists and politicians use to make their decisions. And there is an area of science that is emerging, and it's called ecosystem services. And it's what environments that we lose, what the cost and impact is to the surrounding area. And it's interesting because while some may go after the economists for how they value biology, it's actually emerging in the research that if we evaluate, put the dollars in what happens if you fill in a swamp, release chemicals, and they come up through someone's well water, that's a cost medically, locally, provincially, nationally. And so I just wonder this idea of services, what these areas that maybe economists don't understand biologically, but we are starting to get numbers about what it is if we lose these things that we cannot replace. So I wonder if you could comment on whether there's somehow a partnership that the biological and the accounting, although sometimes it's very unique and defined, might be able to help us out of some of the problems before we build, a golf course over an area, or we put a parking lot in, or fill in a swamp, that maybe this language of accounting can be flipped around and warn people what you will lose, what cost you will incur if you do this action. Are you familiar with this kind of ecosystem?
Oh my
services?
goodness. Oh my goodness. There was just a conference at Waterloo in environmental economics. And people are just starting to figure out a lot of this stuff. It's a kind of, what were you thinking? I was a little girl in 1970, and I remember the zero population growth thing, right? Like, we've known this stuff for decades and decades and decades. Even if you're white, you knew this. And people who lived here forever knew this much longer. That what goes around comes around. And people are now learning how to do environmental accounting and environmental economics. And as far as I know, there are very few of those folks who are Indigenous. And I think it would be transformative if there were more Indigenous scholars doing those things. It would blow us out of the water. It'd just be fabulous. But I'm aware of this. There's a lot of work being done. There's a really nice journal that's the most prestigious journal in accounting in the world called Accounting Organizations and Society. And they do some really critical accounting work, and some of that's environmental. But tying that together with the relationships between companies, which have so much outsized influence on our planet, on Turtle Island. It's just, I feel like I need friends. I need friends. I'm here because I need friends. There's another.
Yeah, there's one.
Did you get a degree last night? No. Yeah? Congratulations. I gotta say, I go to a lot of graduations because I'm on the faculty at Ryerson. They're not this much fun.
I don't know the first thing about accounting, but one of the things I've been working on in a nursing faculty was to bring in knowledge keepers and just tell our students that knowledge keepers are, they have, we would say they're accredited, like if a knowledge keeper's been through the teachings, if they have some, in the Blackfoot culture where I was working, it was certain songs, like if you've been given a certain song, that was like, you have your certificate, your diploma, your PhD. If you sing that song, it means you have a certain amount of knowledge. So my question is, do you think there's a way we could, pull everyone together and find a way to have that knowledge recognized officially, so that you don't have to? So if people already have this knowledge, then they can be treated as scholars, because it's challenging for some Indigenous people to get all the way through post-secondary and finally have letters after their name. But there's a lot of people who should have letters after their name, who have more than the amount of knowledge that corresponds to letters after their name. So is there a way to get that recognized so that you can have them work with you now instead of having to wait for them to finish post-secondary school?
I think that's one of the most important issues in Canadian academia today. I'm not an administrator. Like, I went back to do my PhD in my 40s and finished it in my 50s, and I'm 63 now, right? Like, I just barely finished being a junior professor, so they don't offer me deanships, right? Like, I'm not in that kind of category. And after this kind of research, I won't ever be. But one of the things that I read about is that every time settlers try to figure this out, we screw it up, right? So Thunder Bay, the law school in Thunder Bay, I don't know much about it. I'm sure people here do. There was an Indigenous governance program at UBC, or maybe it was Simon Fraser or Victoria, where was it? Anyhow, also blew up. That we're doing a terrible job at bringing Indigenous people into the circles of accredited knowledge seekers. And I don't know how that changes. I don't have any experience of it. I don't have, like, I know people working on it, and I'm happy to, does anybody here know Monica McKay? She's Nishka, and she's in charge of Indigenous kind of relations at Ryerson, and she's an old friend from church. There are people trying to make it work, but an alternative accreditation program might be just like what's happening with NAITS, right? Like, why don't we all have, all fields have a NAITS? I don't know. And there was it? Oh, okay. Anybody else?
This will be our last question.
So Mark Brett from Melbourne.
I'm going to put on my
the
Australian to Canadian. Okay.
Yeah. So you were saying that when people try to work this stuff out, a bomb goes off. When in my part of Australia, a private company tried to do something that looked like a treaty in 1835, the Crown disallowed it on the grounds that it was a private company.
What company was that?
The Port Phillip Association. So what the Crown did is say, you're a private company, you can't do that. On the other hand, turns out that you've provoked us to realise that we own the land, and then the colonial administrators just proceeded to sell the land as government property once they'd realised that the private company couldn't own it. And there were people who were reporting in the press how much the land had been sold for. So the newspaper in Melbourne collected all the sales and calculated the amount of money. Around 1861, there was something like £1 million that the Crown had generated for its coffers just by selling the land. And people were complaining, saying, how do you know you own the land? So that's the ongoing legal conundrum, which is the flip side. Once you realise that the private company can't monetise, the Crown monetises the land. So I guess I'm interested in how that pattern might have played out in Canada.
That's very cool. I know some Australian business historians. I clearly need to know about Australian business history. I think it sounds very parallel. Now, the thing about the Hudson Bay Company was that they had this royal charter. They were a sort of semi-governmental thing, because we think of companies as not governments, right? They're not the government. They don't like the government. Well, in 1670, when the Hudson Bay Company was started, it was kind of like the government, right? It had a crown charter. So this process of disentangling government and corporation was going on in the 19th century, the 1800s, and clearly was happening globally and not just in the UK. So my hunch is that your example is enormously relevant to my story, and I will need to know more. And your look makes me think I didn't answer your question. Oh, okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm around. Come talk to me.
This time, I believe we are going to have a short coffee break, and the coffee break, if you go straight down the hallway, down to the Brian Stiller room, there will be coffee available. And immediately from there, take your coffee and you'll go into our talking circles. And for those, we have our wonderful Beth Woods running down the aisle to come and share with us how that's gonna all work out. So thank you, Beth.
So just before Beth gives us the directions, I thought that what a takeaway from Allison reminded me of, again, the naming piece that I was just briefly referencing this morning, that as you name something, you want to be careful that you're not laying a name over top of a name that exists, of a function and a place and a people and so on. And I know that in Nova Scotia, Pictou Landing, place where they talk about New Glasgow, where they talk about the rebirth of Scotland in a way, is in a place where we call it Epikaduk, and it's where the ferry boat goes from Nova Scotia across to Prince Edward Island, and it relates to the narrative of the land with Kluskap. And Epikaduk talks about this explosive sound on the water because there's a mist that lies on the water early in the morning and every sound is amplified. But what actually took place there is Kluskap, the first human being, after wrestling with the giant beavers up in the Brodor Lakes in Cape Breton, went and had a major feast and then lay down and slept. And in the early morning when he arose, he passed gas. And so Epikaduk really literally means the sound of a fart on the water. So one wants to be careful of naming.
My ancestors arrived in a boat called the Pigeon into Pictou Harbor some 200 and some years ago. And afterwards they pretended the boat was called the Dove, but it was actually the Pigeon. Stole his lands and he's never forgiven me since. So, if I stand here long enough, by the time I've completed my message to you, there will be coffee on a table, as well as water, as well as some bannock and jam that did not get fully consumed last night, as well as some cake for breakfast for those who would like, as well as some normal items that you might have with your coffee in the morning in the Stiller Lounge, which is the one just two down. And then as that's happening, I'm pretty confident that my wonderful friend Naaman Wood will have completed not only saving, but also printing and also posting on the wall 3 copies of the list of groups, which will tell you on the one column the name of the leader, and then the names of the people that will be in that group. So as soon as you get your coffee, these leaders will be holding, I speak this by faith, these leaders will be holding papers with their names on them. And so once you look on the list and see who your leader is, just look for them and their smiling face holding the paper. So if I speak slowly enough here, I have great faith that this will all take place in that order. But I can't think of anything else to say, so are we dismissed? We are dismissed to go and see how that all works out for us. Thank you.